Throughout history, power was rarely proven with words. It was shown through rituals, symbols, and objects that spoke without sound. Among them, swords held a special place, not because they were used to fight, but because they represented the right to rule. Over time, some blades stopped being weapons and became symbols of authority. They outlived their owners and preserved the ideas they were created to represent. In this video, you will see some of the most beautiful and famous swords used in the coronations of European kings. Let's begin. The sword Joyeuse is closely linked to Charlemagne, the king of the Franks and the first emperor of Western Europe. Stories about it describe a weapon surrounded by legend. But in reality, the sword we see today did not appear all at once. It slowly took shape over time, starting in the 9th century, changing again and again as centuries passed. What truly matters about Joyeuse is not how many battles it may have seen. Its real importance came later. From the 13th century onward, the sword became part of the coronation of French kings. It was carried not to threaten, but to confirm authority. It stood as a quiet sign that power had been granted by tradition and by the church. In terms of design, Joyeuse looks like a standard one-handed medieval sword. The blade is around 83 centimeters long and about 4.5 centimeters wide. It weighs roughly 1.5 to 2 kilograms, which was normal for the period. This tells us something important. The sword was once practical. It could have been used in real combat, even if that was never its main purpose. Over time, its role changed. The guard, grip, and pommel were rebuilt and decorated with gold. Each generation left its mark. Slowly, the sword stopped being a weapon and became a symbol. Today, Joyeuse rests in the Louvre, not as a tool of war, but as a silent witness to the long story of French royal power. The sword Scherbiec is surrounded by a story that sounds almost too symbolic to be accidental. According to legend, its name comes from a notch in the blade, said to have been made when a Polish ruler struck the Golden Gate of Kiev. Whether this actually happened matters less than what the story meant. The sword was believed to carry memory, a visible mark of authority and conquest. Historically, Scherbiec appears in the 13th century and quickly becomes something unique. Unlike many famous swords, it was not tied to constant warfare. Instead, it became the coronation sword of Polish kings. From that moment on, it belonged not to one ruler, but to the idea of kingship itself. The value of Scherbiec was never about combat. During coronation ceremonies, it symbolized lawful power and divine order. Inscriptions on the blade reinforced this idea, linking royal authority to sacred protection and justice, rather than personal strength. The sword did not threaten, it legitimized. Over time, the sword changed. The hilt and fittings were altered, decorations were added, and parts were restored as centuries passed. Yet the blade itself remained the heart of the object. Even as styles evolved, the meaning stayed the same. Scherbiec continued to represent continuity, not violence. Physically, the sword looks like a proper medieval weapon. Its length and weight fall well within the normal range for a one-handed sword of the period. That detail is important. This was not a fragile ceremonial prop. It was a real sword, intentionally removed from the battlefield and placed into ritual. Today, Scherbiec is preserved as one of Poland's most important royal relics. It no longer speaks of conquest or war. Instead, it tells a quieter story, one where power is confirmed not by striking, but by being recognized. The sword Kirtana is easy to recognize. Its blade ends not in a sharp point, but in a blunt, broken tip. According to legend, this was done on purpose. The sword was meant to remind the ruler that power should be restrained. Even a king, standing at the highest point of authority, was expected to show mercy. Kirtana is closely linked to medieval England and appears in historical records by the 12th century. Unlike many famous swords, it was never tied to a single battlefield or heroic duel. Instead, it became part of royal ceremonies. During coronations, it was carried alongside other regalia, quietly communicating an idea rather than threatening force. What made Kirtana special was its meaning. It was not a weapon of punishment, but a symbol of controlled power. The sword represented justice, tempered with mercy. In a time when authority was often proven through violence, Kirtana stood for something different, the responsibility that came with ruling. Over the centuries, the sword changed in appearance. The hilt and guard were reworked, decorations were added, and materials reflected the tastes of different eras. Yet the most important feature remained untouched: the blunt tip. This detail preserved the original message, even as everything around it evolved. In physical terms, Kirtana looks like a proper medieval sword. Its size and weight fall within the normal range for a one-handed weapon of the period. This creates a quiet contrast. It was a real sword, fully capable of combat, yet deliberately removed from warfare. Today, Kirtana no longer represents the power to strike. It represents the choice not to. Preserved as part of the British crown jewels, the sword stands as a reminder that authority, at its best, was once expected to limit itself. The Reichsschwert was never meant to belong to one man. From the very beginning, this sword stood for something larger. In the medieval imagination, it represented the idea of empire itself, a power that existed above individual rulers. When an emperor held this sword, he did so only temporarily, as a guardian rather than an owner. Historically, the Reichsschwert emerged during the High Middle Ages and became part of the coronation regalia of the Holy Roman Empire. It appeared in ceremonies where authority was not claimed through conquest, but formally granted. The emperor was presented as the defender of order, law, and Christian unity, and the sword served as a visible reminder of that responsibility. What made the Reichsschwert important was its meaning. Unlike personal weapons carried into battle, this sword symbolized the right to judge and to protect the realm. It was not about personal strength or heroism, it was about duty. The sword stood for justice, enforced in the name of a higher order rather than individual ambition. Over the centuries, the sword's appearance evolved. The hilt and fittings were modified, decorations became richer, and restorations followed the tastes of different eras. Yet its overall form remained consistent. These changes did not weaken its meaning, they reinforced it, allowing each generation to recognize the same symbol of imperial authority. In physical terms, the Reichsschwert is larger and heavier than many ceremonial swords. Its size and weight sit near the upper range for a one-handed medieval weapon. This gave it a commanding presence, even when it was never intended for combat. The sword looked powerful because it was meant to be seen. Today, the Reichsschwert no longer plays a role in coronations. Preserved as a historic regalia, it stands as a reminder of a time when rulers attempted to define power not only through force, but through order, law, and ceremony. It is a sword that speaks less of war and more of governance. The sword of Saint Stephen is not remembered for battles, From the very beginning, it was linked to something else, the idea that power could be sacred. In Hungarian tradition, this sword is associated with Stephen I, the ruler who transformed Hungary into a Christian kingdom. The blade was never meant to glorify violence. It was meant to stand beside faith and law. Historically, the sword belongs to the period when Hungary was taking its place among the Christian kingdoms of Europe, around the late 10th and early 11th centuries. This was a time of transition, when authority needed more than military strength. A king had to be recognized by the church, by tradition, and by the wider Christian world. The sword became part of that language of legitimacy. What made this weapon important was its role as a symbol. It represented a ruler who governed not only by force, but by obligation. In this context, the sword did not threaten enemies. It confirmed responsibility. Power was presented as something granted, not taken. Over time, the sword changed in appearance. Elements of the hilt and fittings were altered, restored, or replaced as centuries passed. These changes reflected shifting artistic styles rather than a change in meaning. The blade itself remained tied to the founding story of the kingdom, carrying significance far beyond its physical form. In terms of size and weight, the sword fits well within the range of early medieval one-handed weapons. It is neither unusually large nor especially heavy. This suggests that it may once have been functional, but its meaning quickly moved away from combat. The sword became part of ceremony, not warfare. Today, the sword of Saint Stephen is remembered as a symbol of origin. It represents the moment when royal authority in Hungary was connected to faith, law, and continuity. More than a weapon, it stands as a reminder that, in some parts of medieval Europe, power was expected to answer to something higher than itself. The sword tizona comes from a time when borders were unstable and cultures collided. It is closely tied to medieval Spain and the long period known as the Reconquista. In legends, the sword is said to inspire fear before a fight even begins. But behind those stories lies something more interesting. Tizona was born on a frontier, not just between kingdoms, but between religions, languages, and traditions. Historically, tizona is associated with Castile in the 11th century. It belonged to the world of professional warriors, where personal weapons mattered deeply. A sword was not only a tool for fighting, but a marker of status and reputation. Carrying such a blade meant being recognized as someone with the right to rule, defend, and command. What made tizona special was its dual nature. It was a real fighting sword, meant for battle, yet it also carried strong symbolic weight. Inscriptions on the blade reflect Islamic craftsmanship, while its use belonged to the Christian side of the conflict. The sword itself became a quiet record of cultural exchange, even in an age defined by war. Over time, tizona changed. Parts of the hilt were replaced, fittings restored, and the blade preserved as it passed from weapon to relic. These changes marked the transition from active use to historical memory. The sword slowly stepped away from the battlefield and into history. In terms of physical design, tizona fits well within the standard of a one-handed medieval fighting sword. Its length and weight are balanced for real combat. The point of balance leans slightly toward the blade, giving strikes more authority. This was not a ceremonial object. It was made to be used. Today, tizona is no longer a weapon of war. It stands as a reminder of a divided land and a complex past, where conflict and cooperation existed side by side. More than a sword, it represents a moment when European history was shaped at the meeting point of different worlds.